Well, I'm very happy to have with us Dr. Gerry Crete, who is the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Souls and Hearts. We had Dr. Peter Malinowski a couple months ago, who is the other co-founder of Souls and Hearts. Dr. Crete is a licensed marriage and family therapist and professional counselor in private practice. His practice, Transfiguration Counseling, is based in Atlanta, Georgia. In addition to marriage counseling, he specializes in the treatment of trauma and anxiety disorders. As an EMDR certified therapist, he helps his clients process past wounds and adapt to stress in new ways. His spiritual approach has been influenced especially by the writings and practices of St. Francis de Sales, St. Ignatius of Loyola, and St. Teresa of Avila. As a Byzantine Catholic, he has also been influenced by the Eastern Christian emphasis on the person as created in the image of God, as well as the concepts of theosis, inner transformation into the likeness of God, and hesychasm, stillness before God. And on a lighter note, he's a lifetime science fiction fantasy geek who enjoys old comic books and movies. He also loves biking and hiking and has been married for 27 years, and he and his wife have 3 grown children. And he's speaking to us today about understanding trauma and addictions from a heart's perspective. So thank you so much, Dr. Gerry, for being with us. So delighted to have you with us in our group today.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. Great. And I think, as Father Boniface mentioned, if there are questions or any comments, feel free to put them in the chat. Of course, we'll have a more open question and answer later, but I love to hear how you're doing. This topic of trauma and addiction and parts work, I could talk all week long. So it's occurring to me that I have to zoom it in and be a little bit concise, and I'd rather zoom it in areas that matter to you than not. So feel free to let me know any of your questions or concerns. If I talk about something and it's so obvious you all know it, please feel free to say, hey, we've covered this a million times. And but if I say something that makes absolutely no sense, I'm very happy to go back and explore it a little more with more detail. I'm coming at this whole approach from a trauma-informed perspective. I'm an EMDR therapist. I'm actually an EMDR consultant, so I can now actually train people in EMDR. That is a trauma approach to treatment, and it's very powerful in healing past memories and this kind of thing. But I'm also a really big fan, not just a fan, I use parts work in my clinical work all the time. And the most popular right now type of parts work is internal family systems. I've also been trained in ego state therapy, which is a type of parts work, kind of comes out of the clinical hypnosis tradition and psychodynamic tradition. I have found myself, I'm on a mission right now, and I'm working on a manuscript because I really want to be able to explain and explore these types of treatment from a Catholic perspective, because I think there are a lot of ways in which this clinical work really works, but I also think there's a unique Catholic way of looking at it, and I'm passionate about that. And I think there are some ways in which it can be a little bit misused, but there's also some ways with our faith it can be amplified and just so powerful and so amazing. And I've seen that in the clinical work that I've been doing for a number of years now. And so I want to share that. So I get excited about that. I could talk about it all day, but I'm going to zoom in on a couple of points. I'll say something about trauma to begin with, and that is trauma is ubiquitous, which means it's everywhere. And I've kind of coined this term. I like to use the term original trauma. Of course, I believe in original sin and the fall of man, but I believe that as a result of that original sin, and as a result of the fall, we've experienced as humanity, we've experienced a trauma, a loss of connection with God, a loss of connection with nature, a loss of connection even with each other. And as a result, we carry the burden of that loss of connection. And so, an interesting way to look at Christ's redemption is not only salvation of sin, which of course, number one, but is also a relieving us of a burden, of a deep burden of shame and disconnection, and calling us to real deep renewed connection. So I kind of come at it a little bit from the perspective of understanding that we all are affected by trauma. It might not be capital T trauma, the most the most pervasive or the most difficult to overcome traumas are military assault and sexual assaults. Those are the top two. But we also have divorce, we also have bullying, we also have emotional abuse, we have all sorts of capital T traumas. And then of course we have smaller T traumas that are still very, very that affect us, and smaller interpersonal relational wounds and so on. And so I approached this whole this whole thing of healing, this whole thing of working through with counseling and therapy from a perspective that we all experience trauma. We all need healing from it. Now I'm going to say something a little bit about parts work, and I mentioned internal family systems. Some of you may be familiar with that. Maybe Dr. Peter Malinowski, if you heard him before, he talks quite a bit about that. He's brilliant in his approach on that. And so I have found that parts work is so powerful in working with people, but I've kept asking myself why and how does it align with our faith? And the more I've explored and looked at some of my own favorite spiritual writings, my own understanding of the faith, I see it embedded in our faith, and I'm excited about bringing that out. So the idea behind parts work would be that inside of us, within our soul, I suppose, we have a self. I use the term inmost self or inner self. Sometimes you hear core self, higher self, true self. But this inmost self, in the Greek, you have the word nous, Nous. It is the idea of this sort of the heart, the deepest part of the heart. And so we have this core self created in God's image, able to connect with God in deep ways. Because of the fall, has been, we would say in the Eastern tradition, darkened, perhaps, but still in his image and still capable of greatness in terms of compassion, in terms of creativity, and all sorts. This is the source of, in a sense, our connection with God. But we also within us have parts. We might say in ego state therapy, we might call them ego states. They're kind of like sub-personalities. And they have, in a sense, their own thoughts and feelings. They experience the world a certain way. And those parts tend to dominate our natural, normal, everyday behavior. And in internal family systems, Richard Schwartz, who developed this whole approach, has actually categorized them into different kind of functions or roles. So we have manager parts. So there's a part of me that shows up, comes to work, is a good worker, professional, presents myself a certain way. I have another part of me that shows up when I'm hanging out with my friends and I'm socializing, and I'm, there's another part of me, so to speak, and those might be considered like managers or just, good functional roles that I might take on. The other parts that Richard Schwartz identifies would be a part that is he calls an exile. And we've seen this in psychology for a long time before Richard Schwartz, this inner child. Might have more than one, but we have parts that are wounded, that are very, I like the word exile because they are like far away from our consciousness, our regular consciousness. They're kind of hidden away, they're pushed away in a sense, but they carry with them wounds and memories from the past. And then we have parts that Richard Schwartz calls firefighters that, and I like the term firefighter because a firefighter, when there's an emergency, he comes in, the fire truck comes and he just arrives at your house. If it's on fire, he's just going to take out the fire. He doesn't care about your drapes. He doesn't care about your door. He's just going to come in and take care of business and to take out the pain, take out the whatever the struggle is. And so as I work with people with trauma and addictions, what I'm noticing and what I'm working with is that people have regular manager parts that manage their everyday life, but sometimes something happens that triggers that. Something happens that disturbs their everyday management of their lives. And that wounded, exiled, often childlike part that's holding memories from the past, wounds, and so on, is in some way exposed. I didn't mention it, but there are sometimes protector parts that can kind of be there to kind of prevent that, but sometimes that doesn't work and the wound is exposed. And then there is a deep sense of pain, shame, maybe even fear. Those are really negative emotions. And then you have, as a response for the system, is a firefighter who comes in with the one job is, I've got to make sure that pain stops. I've got to make sure that exile wounded child is put back in the box. And so anything goes to make that happen. And that might be alcohol, that might be drugs, that might be pornography, that might be some other way. Maybe it's a more benign thing like video games, or even workaholism or exercising or something can become a way to like shut that away. So anyway, I just want to lay that a little bit, this notion that we have a core self, I like to say inmost self, and we have multiple parts. And these parts carry with them certain kinds of burdens. And so an exiled child part might be carrying a burden that says, I'm not worth anything, or, I'm bad. And then we have manager parts that are just busy doing everyday life. And we might have a protector part that says, I can't have that feeling be present. So a typical protector might be a very like a wall, like an emotional wall, or might be a protector part might be look like a very critical parent, because a critical parent can keep the wounded child kind of away or quiet. At least it works for a little bit. And then, so we may have these different parts in the way. And so we also have, and like I mentioned, also the firefighter part. And so I'm talking about trauma and addictions. The firefighter part kind of represents the addiction. And the exiled child part represents the part holding on to the memories and wounds and so on from childhood, the trauma. And what can happen? And so okay, so I laid that out just a little bit, and that's the quickest, fastest, briefest version I could give you of a little bit of parts work. And there's whole books on this. But I'm thinking you guys are spiritual directors, and so I'm thinking to myself, well, what do you need to understand about this? How might it affect you in spiritual direction? And the thing that comes to my mind, and I'd really be curious to hear from you, your thoughts on this, and what you've noticed in working with people, would be that some of those protectors or even managers that that are kind of keeping the exile wounded child kind of far away on purpose are religious in nature, some of them, or even spiritual in nature. And I think that a lot of people that come to church with very good intentions, by the way, all these parts are very well intentioned, all of them, even the firefighter that's taking out the fire in an addictive way intends to do good. And the managers intend to keep things going, and the protectors intend to protect that wounded child from anything that might hurt it. So I do want to point out, like, all these parts are good. They just sometimes carry burdens. They carry weights. They carry negative beliefs. They carry voices of critical parents, or they carry some negative bad things. So they're carrying all these burdens. And so even when people show up at church, or they show up in to do ministries, or they show up in spiritual direction, and they have very good intentions, they may often have very religious parts that are carrying burdens, right? And so I was reflecting on this a little bit. I try to make it a little personal if I can, just to make it relate to people. You know, I'm in my I'll have to admit it, my early 50s. And so I grew up just post Vatican II. And so, you know, in Canada, and I went to a publicly funded Catholic school. And honestly, we spent our whole time, this was the 70s and early 80s, like Jesus was like it was the Gospels, it was Jesus, it was just all love. My mother, who's a little older, grew up pre-Vatican II, and honestly, she has the stories, all the stories, the horrible stories of the nuns with the rulers and all that business. And I honestly, when I talked to her and I asked her questions about her faith, I'm like, did you actually, learn anything? And she's so a little bit negative about it. But what I had the nuns who were singing Kumbaya and playing guitar. She had the nuns that were strict and whatever. And so the point I want to make in saying this is that we come with a certain spiritual burden. My mother would have come with the burden of religion is all about rules and being strict, and you were in trouble all the time, and there's a lot of shame. So her parts might carry that burden, and her part might, and so as a result, her protectors and so on might actually be looking for a faith or whatnot that is all about freedom and all about maybe she would be like the kind that would say, like, let's be spiritual and not religious or something, right? Whereas my part, I grew up with the hippiness of it all and lots of Carrie Landry and all that stuff. And there was a part of me that wanted rich, like I carried the burden of, hey, I want to actually learn about my faith, and like I want to learn about the richness of the tradition. I want to learn about like why we believe this. So I came in with like a hunger. It's not a bad thing, but it's a burden that I was missing. I felt like I didn't get the richness and intellectual tradition and the deep spiritual tradition of our church. So you see how whoever is coming to you, whatever their background, whatever their history, they're carrying some burden. And I want to throw out that as I'm thinking about spiritual direction, so you're meeting people, I think you're meeting their parts, protector or manager parts, carrying those, whatever burden. What you might or might not be actually encountering is what I've said before is the inmost self. And the inmost self is not a part, right? It's not a part carrying a burden. It has no agenda. It has no, it's not affected so much by like the woundedness of whatever. It is the core of that person created in God's image. And when when the inmost self is receives sanctifying grace and so on, it really is the closest we can come to being like Christ. And so I would think that in spiritual direction, you would want to be aware of and work with and come to know parts that are carrying those burdens. But you would also, as you identify them, and that's what we do in parts work, is we call it unblending, but we identify these different parts, and we at least acknowledge them and respect them, love them, and bring them out, so that this core self is able to really emerge. And now when we access that core self, that inmost self, it's a game changer, because that self is able to relieve, with God's grace, it's not separate from God, it can't be separate from God, can begin to relieve all those burdens, and can begin to really bring all these different parts, because some of our parts, these different parts we have within us, are in total conflict with each other. Like, we may have a religious part who's like, you do this and that, you're gonna follow the rules, blah blah blah, and we have another part that's like angry about that for some reason, who knows, so we have all these different parts, but the goal of the inmost self is to relieve their burdens, bring them in together, bring them into a sense of harmony, and to actually be able, so they function. All of our parts are meant to do cool things in connection with this core self, and that the cool things, then it becomes alive. Then there's a zone, they're in flux, there's this powerful motion. That's the kingdom. Like, that's the kingdom of God at work within ourselves, when all of our parts are functioning the way God intended. And it's exciting. So, and Father Boniface, you're gonna have to tell me when my time's up, because I lose track of time, and how much when it's time to go to the next stage. Okay. I'm going to throw something out. I did my doctoral work at the University of Georgia, a very secular school, but I ended up doing a lot of qualitative research more than quant. Dr. Peter's Mr. Quant. That's not me. But quantitative is all about numbers and statistics, and qualitative is about people's stories and about the understanding lived experience. I was especially interested in phenomenology, which is about people's lived experience. And what I'm a little bit excited right now is that I did all this research. My qualitative research and phenomenological work was on male survivors of childhood trauma and how they heal in relationships. So that's what I did. And I've been doing clinical work since. But the work that I'm doing right now has led me to do a little mini phenomenological study on the Gospels and how Christ operates in the Gospels with others that he encounters. And because I kind of speculated that Christ, as the perfect human being, reflects how the inmost self, right? The inmost self has to be connected with Christ and imitate him, and is in his image. And so in analyzing how Christ responds to others, I thought, wow, that could inform how the inmost self is to respond and relate to the parts of the self. So I went through the Gospels, and I did this thing where you code, it's coding, and you do this little analysis, and then it breaks it down into themes, and then you break it down to, like, what is, they call it the lived experience, or what is the core elements of the lived experience of some phenomenon. And so I did that a little bit, and I really enjoyed my findings. And maybe that's nothing shocking, right? Like, everybody would say, well, of course, but this is what I found. And I think it's what I found about Christ. And I think it's how the inmost self responds and behaves when activated, when accessed, with all the parts of the self. And so I'm just going to go through quickly here, the 8 that I found. The first one is that he loves with gentleness and humility. that is most exemplified, I think, in the story of the prodigal son, where the father literally runs the son in humility. He affirms his worth and loves him. The second is this: he seeks the inmost self seeks the lost with confidence and is attuned to the will of God. So I think that's really exemplified with the Good Shepherd, in that not only does, like, the prodigal son father sees the son coming and then he runs and gets excited and goes to see him, but the Good Shepherd literally leaves his flock and, like, goes after the lost one. And I think we do that. The inmost self wants to is so excited to find a part of the self and love him, and he's also willing to go find him. Christ empathizes and rejoices. You see that especially with child parts. So Christ literally asks the apostles to bring the children to him so he can pray. He can lay hands on them and pray over them. He says it's better for a millstone to put on someone's neck than to hurt one of his little ones. So he empathizes and he loves our child parts, our wounded parts, our exiles. The inmost self, like Christ, is there to know and affirm. Christ says, like the Good Shepherd knows his sheep, they know his voice. He affirms them. He affirms who we are. He relieves burdens. We see that all over the Gospels, the physical burdens, whether it's a leprosy or withered hand or hemorrhage or blindness or deafness, and he heals these physical ailments. I know from EMDR therapy, when I do trauma treatment with someone and they bring up a traumatic memory, I say, where do you feel that in your body? There's always a place they feel it in their body. It's often the chest, sometimes their neck, sometimes some part of the body they feel it. And when I say notice that, we now know our therapy is not just talk therapy for most of us, especially trauma work. It's the body and the soul and the mind, they're connected. And so when Christ is healing physical wounds, I don't believe he was only healing physical wounds, right? And so he relieves burdens. He also unclean spirits and demons, spiritual wounds, but he also forgives. And we see that with, obviously the classic examples, the woman at the well and so on. And he forgives them and he loves, despite what they've done. And his whole goal is to bring freedom and the lightness that comes with having our burdens relieved. The sixth one calls us to righteousness and holiness. So he literally, if we see that inner world that I'm talking about with the inmost self and all the parts of the self, I see it as like a little temple within. Of course, St. Paul says we're the temple of the Holy Spirit that dwells within us. So what does Christ do? Like, Christ literally angrily kicks out the people who are selling things in the temple. He wants the temple to be a place of righteousness. We're called to holiness. So he calls that whole world, that inner world, to be holy, righteous. He calls us to communion. He is the seventh one. He doesn't just want us to have this great inner peace and inner sanctity and have this wonderful experience of contemplation only for our own sake. He calls us to connect with others. So we're over and over the inmost self. Once all the parts are in harmony and everything else, we're naturally expected to go out like the Good Samaritan and like help others. And so there's the call to communion. And the last one is a call to alertness and action. And we see that throughout the Gospels, Christ literally asks his apostles not to fall asleep, and they fall asleep. He literally, the garden. He's calling them always to be alert and awake and so on, and because there's something important happening. So there's like an impetus, there's a motivation, there's a zest, there's a joy that comes with this, with the inmost self being actually accessed and alive. All right. So I went that kind of quick. I know I'm throwing a lot at you guys. And I don't, oh, I only see, oh, I wasn't paying attention. There's two chat comments. I might have thought I might have more by now, but okay, so I was asked about a living example of what this looks like. Yeah. Okay, great. So number 7 was a call to communion. 6 was a call to righteousness and holiness. 7, call to communion, and 8 is a call to alertness and action. Okay, so here's the way that I look at this. All right. If someone comes in and I ask them, like, what's kind of active in their system right now, what's disturbing them, and I ask them to look inside, and often I'm asking also about what they notice in their body. So there might be a like agitation, a sense of anxiety. It might actually be some pressure in their body, possibly, but it's connected to something that's disturbing them. And so when I ask them to look inside and see kind of who it is, I usually go for like this inner, some people call it a conference room or something. I just say your inner living room. I guess you could say your inner temple, but I don't know if that works for most people. Inner living room kind of works for most. And what is that feeling and sensation connected to? Who do you notice? And then a lot of the time, somebody will say, especially if it's a manager or protector part, it might look very much like them. But there might be something else they notice about it, being stressed or whatnot. So the first thing I do there is I say, well, what do you notice? Can we get a little closer to actually like see this part? And is this part is that part of you doing anything, wanting to say anything, whatever? And so I just explore a little bit, just sort of noticing. But the magic question, and often the person will spontaneously say things and they'll give a little history, like, maybe it's they're stressed at work or whatever, and it's just like very like what do we call a doer part or worker part or busy parts, and they're just like, I'm doing this and this is happening and I don't know if this is going to go well and da 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 da, and there's like all this, and then they just sort of they're just as they're expressing all their stress, it's really coming from this part. And then I will ask the question often, because it's kind of a magic question in that moment. How do you feel toward that part? Now, if I hear, well, he's kind of an idiot and he really should just like slow down and get a life. Okay. If I hear something like just say something like that, I know that's another part. There's another part, a critical part, maybe. Might even be, for that matter, a religious part that says he should be holier and not work so much or something. Who knows, right? He should spend more time with his family or something like this, right? So I immediately know I have another part. And so then what I want to do there is I want to respect that, okay, there's another part here. And I have options as a therapist. I have options to be able to say, well, do I ask that other part to hold off and wait? Do I spend some time, which I normally would, at least initially, spend some time with that part and understand where it's coming from? But as I do that, as I ask, how do you feel about that part? Other parts show up. When I hear what sounds to me like the inmost self, and the inmost self's characteristics are going to be that it is compassionate, that it is loving, it doesn't have an agenda, that it's just wants to connect. It tends to have courage and creativity. It tends to be patient, all those things. And some of the qualities that I was sharing with you before, it has this natural, there's a feeling that just happens when that, and I don't say part, that the inmost self appears. And so if I hear wow, I feel very bad for that part. I do a little check. Okay, is that pity? But or is it really compassion? Like then I might, just to make sure I'm right. And so I'm like, okay, does that feel like compassion? Do you feel like, yeah, like whether there, I feel compassion like that part, this guy is caring too much. Ah, okay. Then right away I move toward saying something like, well, can you let that part know that you feel, that you get it, that you understand his struggle, that you feel for him? And usually he'll say, yeah. And then I go, can this busy doer, worker, bee, stressed out part, do you feel that? Now all of a sudden, and it's amazing how often, now sometimes they'll say no, or it's too hard to hear or whatever. So we know there's another part in the way. But often, sometimes you'll hear, yeah, wow. And even if this busy worker part is kind of crazy and does more than he should and all these things, I will sometimes say, like, can you thank this part for all the work he's been doing for you? I can't tell you how often when I do that, the person starts crying, how moved they are, because this part of them, this part of the self, has been working constantly, nonstop, doing whatever it's been doing for so long, unappreciated by their own internal system, right? Suddenly feels like somebody is here, somebody is listening to me, and it's their own inmost self. And that's a very powerful moment. It's a very powerful moment. And what can happen often then is, once you connect with that part, that manager, it might be a manager part, it might be a protector, you end up finding out, why has it been doing all of this? Why is it working so hard? What burden is it carrying? And then you find, because now you've connected a bit with it. And it's like, who told you had to work so hard? Where did you learn this? Where does this come from? And you hear from this part something like, um, I learned that as a kid, that if I didn't work harder than everybody else, I wasn't worth anything. Now all of a sudden, okay, now we might be getting closer to an exiled child part. So now all of a sudden you can work, you can appreciate that, you can understand that the inmost self is capable at that point perhaps of being, and with some direction, like, you don't have to, maybe right now, maybe you don't need to work that hard anymore. I understand you had to, maybe at some point you felt you had to, because it was the only way to get any kind of recognition, whatever it is. And then, so the work continues. I do have a question here. It looks like a good point. Um, Someone is asking about someone as a directee who doesn't understand parts. Yes. Um, right. And showing all the signs of exiles. How can you as directors help them to see where they need to go? How can we bring them into that conversation? Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you, because I think I need to come down to reality for where you guys are at and what you might do. Here's the thing I would throw out to you, to any spiritual director, is to maybe try to do some of this work for yourself. Because I know as a therapist, when I am only, like, if I am working from what I would call a burden part perspective, I'm not as effective. Obviously, I have a therapist part that's sort of a manager that does, I think, good work, but he needs to be connected with myself, my inmost self. So I have to get to a place, I call it recollection. Like, I would say recollection, where I have to be connected to all my parts, aware of what's going on inside of me, and aware of, and then obviously bring in, as best as I can, invite God's grace to be present before I could work with somebody really well anyway. And I have to be in that space, because I would think that as a spiritual director, tell me if I'm wrong and I don't have it right, but my thought is that your role is to help them see how the Spirit is moving in their lives, right? And how you are you're attuned to that, and you're present with that, and you're just allowing them to see it and work with that. So I would think that if you're in a place where your inmost self is accessed, and whatever managers you have, you're using them like appropriately with that, then you're in a better place to, in a sense, in a sacramental way, represent Christ in that moment through you. Otherwise, you're just some burdened religious part of you is showing up and trying to help them, maybe with good intentions, but it's not going to be the same. And so I think my own view on this is that when you're in a place, in that place, you have a way better chance of bringing out their core self. And you have a better chance of, without reaction, noticing those different parts that might be showing up in them. And you don't judge them, and you don't like criticize them or try to make them change so much. It's just like, oh, I'm noticing maybe there's a part of you right now that is feeling this. Maybe they'll say no, maybe they'll say yes, but you're in a place to be able to like notice that with more freedom. You're not trying to change them, you're just sort of aware of them. Okay, so what about if you have an individual who you have worked with that continues to cycle through their parts, and they resist moving forward towards healing and unity? Yeah, well, the way I would see that would be, if there's a part that is super resistant, right? Like they're, for whatever reason, they're coming for spiritual direction, and maybe you're trying to open that up, and yet you're experiencing resistance. I would say that's a burden part. So then I would think about, well, what are you carrying that makes this kind of change, or this kind of that makes this frightening, or that makes this scary for you? I would look at any resistance as revealing what the person is really most struggling with, and what's so hard for them. So I would empathize with it. In other words, like, it must be really frightening for you to imagine, right? Being closer to Christ, or if that's it, right? I don't know. I have to know the whole story, but whatever it might be that they might be scared to admit, that might be, like, and empathizing with that based on what you know about their experience in their life. Okay. And if they're cycling through parts, on one way, if just talking, like what I was doing there, showing you a little bit, is what we call blending. So you're trying to like get all those parts sort of out in the open, and not be like so enmeshed, if you will, with the core self. But sometimes you have to do something else, like maybe have them draw their parts if they can. Like, let's sit down just for a moment and draw the different parts of you, and like brainstorm it. We can change them later. We don't have to, just whatever. And so that way they might not cycle through, as you said, so much. They might actually gain some awareness and be able to relate. We want to be able to relate to our parts, not have the parts kind of like so dominant that they're sort of, if you will, taken over, so to speak. Has a person cried because God himself resides in the human heart, and so the person actually hears God? Yes, totally. What you just wrote there, whoever that was, Victoria. Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say that's very much so possible, that I would see God working. God works through the inmost self. Like that is I'd have to like think for a second what's the passages that might come to me in a moment, that the Holy Spirit flows through the heart. anyway, I was just reading that a little while ago. So yes, I agree with Victoria's comment. Hearing them, okay. Well, you had it twice, so it's the same comment. Thank you. Yeah, good point. Just to follow up. Right. You bring your own experience into every session. Yeah. Um, yeah. Yeah, I wrote an article. I don't know. We'll see if it gets published. I was Christendom College asked me to write an article because I just did a talk with Matt Fradd, and I wasn't expecting to have to talk on abortion, but because Roe v. Wade had just been overturned, and so that's like literally the Friday I did the interview on Monday, and so that came up, and we were talking, and so because we were talking about abortion, they asked me to write an article on abortion and the idea of converting hearts. And at the end of the day, as I was writing this article, because it was kind of fun to write, actually, and interesting, I came to the conclusion you have to convert your own heart first. If you don't, so I would say the same as me as a counselor, you as a spiritual director, you have to convert your heart first. And that means really being honest and aware of what parts you have that might be burdened or might be struggling or might be in trouble or might be carrying something from your own past. And you have to be super aware and transparent with your own spiritual director and with your own therapist. You have to be super transparent and honest in order to really be able to, right, to help others. How are we doing? I feel like I've gone over the 5 or 10 minutes that you gave me 20 minutes ago.
Well, this has been great. It just flowed right into the questions naturally through the chat, so I have no problem. If I can just insert a little word
Yeah.
kind of in reference to that question about how to use some of these things in spiritual direction. Julie, brought up, well, we're not going to introduce a whole complicated system, but it's amazing. We really, the language is really natural, so somebody's coming out really strongly about something, maybe about abortion. They're very animated about Roe v. Wade being overturned. And you might say, you might just observe, well, you're really worked up about that. Well, there's also a part of me, they'll actually say that. There's also a part of me that's really compassionate and feels like maybe this is helpful, and there are going to be people who are distressed. And so there's a part of you that's very upset, and there's a part of you that's compassionate. Yeah, that's right. How do you feel about that part of you that's upset? So I haven't had to introduce the whole IFS system to say that, but our knowledge of this kind of interaction, and it's so often I think of people who say, like, Father, I just haven't prayed that much since I saw you the last time. But I really want to pray. Okay, so there's a part of you that didn't want to pray, and there's a part of you that did want to pray. How do you feel about that part of you that didn't want to pray? Why do you think that part of you didn't want to pray? You can actually do that kind of thing, and it helps people to step back from themselves and look at themselves with greater compassion, because they'll be able to mirror your compassion towards them. You're not judging the part of them that didn't pray, which the part of them, and another part of them may have judged. And so anyway, your knowledge of some of these things can very naturally flow into spiritual direction as you understand them. But I would say Dr. Crete's answer is the best. If this is resonating with you, then I would encourage you to press into it for yourselves. The more that you understand these things in your own interior, the more naturally you'll be able to kind of notice them and work with them explicitly or implicitly in spiritual direction.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love the way you just explained that. And I noticed Jana said, is it true that our desire to move a person beyond where they're at is a red flag pointing to a burden part we carry? And I think that's probably true. I know even as a therapist, like I might come in with the idea, like, I think I know where this person needs to go. And I might even be right from a long-term perspective or something, but if I walk into the session with that, I'm going to miss what's really going on in that person's heart that day. And to be able to open that up and not bring my agenda. So the minute I have an agenda, then I know it's a part. But I love what you just said about sitting with the part that we might normally try to kind of repress. So if, like in your example, like if somebody comes in and says, well, there's a part of me that wants to pray every day and has this whole routine and it's figured out, I'm going to do like a holy hour and 5 rosaries all week and something like this. And then you have another part that's like, I don't want to do any of that. Well, we might have a temptation to like push that away rather than sit with that and actually say, I want to understand you better. Like, I actually care about that part more than anything else. I want to know, I might be interested to know why this religious part wants to do all this stuff, but if there's a burden there. But I'm also interested in what's really going on for the part that doesn't want to. Because when you break past that, or not break past it, but when you understand it and empathize with it, you've just opened up what might be something you didn't even know was there. It's like the example with abortion. Like I gave this example in another interview, but I worked for so long with this guy that was so Catholic and so pious, but so pro-choice. And I could never understand it. And I was constantly, like, every once in a while we'd have a little argument about something about it. And bugged me. And but that's my agenda. And when I stopped and listened and tried to connect a little bit with what is this part of him that is pro-choice? What is that? Who is that? What is going on there? And it hit me like a ton of bricks that before his conversion, his girlfriend had had an abortion. Now all of a sudden I was like, oh, all along I've been failing because I didn't know like what really was going on in his heart, and why this part took this strong position was to defend himself against the guilt and the shame and the loss of that. And it wasn't until I was willing to just really see that I could really help him there.
If I can draw your attention to Rosemary's question about how to learn more for ourselves, and that might be a kind of transition into a conclusion too, Dr. Crete, if you can point to some resources for us as spiritual directors to get a better insight into what's happening in ourselves and maybe learn a little bit more about some of this. I guess I would also, I generally say this to spiritual directors, some of these things really resonate, and I'm part of the ongoing formation is to provide tools, insights, different directions for continued learning. Some of it doesn't resonate, and I wouldn't want anyone to feel overwhelmed like, whoa, all these parts, a lot of moving parts to these parts, and get you concerned that you're not going to do good spiritual direction if you don't figure everything out. So I don't want to overwhelm any of your parts that might start feeling a little bit crazy about all of this. But if there are some directions you could send us in, Dr. Crete, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm working on a book right now, a Catholic approach to parts work. I've tentatively called it the Self in Communion. I was working on it. I've been working on it for the last 3 months, like nonstop. And so I want to be able to tell you that book's ready. It's not. But I'll try to get it through channels to find out. In the meantime, I mean, there are a few good books about it. Like, I mean, some of Richard Schwartz's earlier stuff on Introduction to Internal Family Systems are good books to read, to understand. I wouldn't read No Bad Parts, and I wouldn't read anything too recent because I feel like he's gone in a very new age direction that makes me uncomfortable. Altogether You is a book by a Christian writer who's a therapist. It's a fairly decent book about parts work. You've had Dr. Peter Malinowski on before. We have a group, a community on Souls and Hearts called Resilient Catholics, and they do calls it an IMK, which is like you'll do an assessment on all your parts as part of that group, and can learn about parts with Dr. Peter. I'm on there sometimes. I'm working with a group called Catholic Journeyman right now. I'm trying to build that up, but all of our Souls and Hearts approaches tend to come from a parts work perspective. Awesome. Oh, thank you. Thank you for putting in the link. Yeah. And there'll be more to come. And if you join, even if you don't join the community, if you even come to our website and just like get our newsletter, it's only once a week, you'll hear updates like when my book comes out or when Peter's Interior Therapist podcast, Dr. Peters, so good. and he really comes at it from a parts approach.
And also on soulsandhearts.com, there is a kind of table of contents. You can search by subject, and then it links you into articles and podcasts. I always point people to podcast 71, 72, and 74 for the interior integration for Catholics. Well, you have given us a wealth, Dr. Gerry. It's really wonderful. You gave such a nice introduction to internal family systems. I'm always looking for concise ways to approach these things, and because I'm all over the place, so I never know if I'm really presenting a comprehensive picture. And you gave such a nice, clear, understandable presentation about parts, and then some beautiful applications, and you do that in such a peaceful way that's also really a blessing to receive from. And I love your connection. You just made the comment about the nous, but I'm very interested. When I present Christian anthropology in our spiritual direction classes, I use some of those Greek models with the nous as the inmost center. So I'm excited to explore what you bring out in your writing and see how you're putting some of these things together with our Christian tradition. I agree wholeheartedly that this is all through. It's really describing the human person that has this inner multiplicity and held together by a unity, which is really made in the image of God and is a glorious reflection of Him as we are transformed by His grace. So thank you so much for your great work, and be assured of we're all going to pray for you now for this book to
Awesome.
yes, bless so many people with these beautiful combination of psychological insights in the context of our Catholic spiritual tradition. So thank you for that beautiful work and all you're doing in therapy and through spreading the good word.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Let me offer a blessing, and I'll just point our next speaker will be Deacon Jim Keating, who will speak to us about a number of things. I listed them on the topic page: listening to the directee, contextualizing direction in the concretes of an individual's life, and the care of our own interior life as directors. You can see that's going to be a continued theme and an important one. So I hope you can tune in for that on September 12th, the Name of Mary at 8 p.m. Eastern time. So Deacon Keating is really a tremendous spiritual director and a tremendous gift in the church. Thank you again, Dr. Gerry Crete, and let me offer a blessing for everyone. Heavenly Father, seal all that you have taught us. Help it to find good soil in our hearts to take root and bear fruit 30, 60, and 100-fold. Help us to grow in our ministry as spiritual directors, and bless in a special way Dr. Gerry Crete and all of the beautiful work that he's doing scholarly and interpersonally, his teaching and his creativity, guided all by your grace for your glory and for the building up of your kingdom. And may Almighty God bless you, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.